My name is Isabella Hart. I'm 30 years old, and it's 2025 here in Los Angeles, California. I still remember that night, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the way their smiles turned sharp when I said I wanted to build my own design brand. It wasn't just mockery, it was dismissal. As if I'd spoken nonsense at a table where only realistic people were allowed to dream. That dinner changed everything. It didn't break me, it built me. Before I tell you what happened after that dinner, make sure you stay till the end, because sometimes silence speaks louder than success. And if you love stories of quiet revenge and self-made triumphs, don't forget to subscribe. The next evening arrived faster than I expected. Los Angeles evenings have a way of glowing, golden light spilling across glass windows, cars gliding by with that soft hum that feels like the heartbeat of a restless city. But as I dressed for dinner, I wasn't thinking about the city. I was thinking about that same oak table, the laughter, the taste of cold chicken and humiliation that had once burned in my chest. This time, I wasn't the tired cafe worker with dreams too big for her wallet. This time, I owned something, a registered studio, a growing client list, and a quiet sense of self-worth that didn't need applause. I chose a simple black dress, elegant, not loud. My designs were my voice now, not my outfit. Before leaving, I glanced at the small golden plaque on my desk. Hart Studio Interiors. It wasn't much, but it was mine. As I walked up the same gravel path to my aunt's house, I could already hear familiar laughter drifting through the open windows. It hit me like a memory, but softer this time. The door opened before I could knock. Clara stood there, wine glass in hand. Her smile faltered for a second when she saw me. "Isabella, you came," she said, her tone a little too cheerful. "I did," I replied, matching her politeness. The house smelled of rosemary and roast, the same scent from that night. The same scent that once wrapped itself around my insecurities. I walked in, greeted everyone, and found a seat at the table. My uncle looked up from carving the meat. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," he said. "I've been busy," I answered, smiling. "Busy's good," he replied, that same smirk tugging at his mouth. But this time, it didn't sting. It rolled right past me like water over polished stone. As the dinner began, conversations filled the air. Weddings, promotions, children, mortgages. The same cycle of small triumphs and routine stability. I listened quietly, smiling when appropriate, but inside my mind was elsewhere. A week before, I had signed a contract to design the interior of a high-end fashion studio downtown. A collaboration worth more than my entire first year's income combined. But I didn't mention it. Not yet. I'd learned that real confidence doesn't need to be announced. It's felt, not told. Then, halfway through the meal, my aunt turned to me. "So, Isabella," she said, "what are you doing these days? Still doing the decoration thing?" There it was. The same question, the same tone. Only this time, I didn't shrink from it. "I run my own design studio now," I said evenly. "Hart Studio Interiors." A pause, knives stopped, forks hovered. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed to fade. "Oh," she exclaimed after a moment, "how lovely, like a small business." "Not that small," I said, smiling lightly. "We just finished a project for a celebrity client last week." The word celebrity landed like thunder. Clara's eyes widened. "Wait, really? Who?" I took a sip of water before answering. "Can't say names, confidentiality and all that, but you've probably seen her on magazine covers." Their silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then, like a wave receding, the conversation slowly returned. But something had changed. The laughter wasn't quite as loud anymore. Later, as dessert arrived, my cousin Luke leaned over and whispered, "Proud of you, Issy." I smiled. "Thanks for believing in me even back then." He shrugged. "Didn't have to believe. You had that look in your eyes, the kind that doesn't fade." His words hit me harder than I expected. Because maybe, deep down, I'd needed to hear that, not the validation, but the reminder that I hadn't imagined it all. That someone had seen the fire in me before it turned into light. After dinner, I excused myself to the patio for a bit of air. The night was warm, scented with lavender from the garden. I stood by the railing, watching the city lights pulse in the distance. That's when Clara joined me. She hesitated before speaking, her voice softer than usual. "You really did it, huh?" I looked at her, her expression was different. No arrogance, no smirk, just quiet disbelief wrapped in admiration. "I guess I did," I said. She exhaled, almost a laugh. "I didn't think you would. I mean, you were so serious about it. I thought you'd give up after a few months." "I almost did," I admitted. "More times than I can count. But every time I wanted to quit, I heard your laughter in my head. It became motivation." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "Ouch, guess I deserved that." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, it worked out for both of us." She looked down, then back up. "You're different now, calmer." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped needing to prove myself to anyone." When I drove home that night, the city was quiet. My reflection stared back from the window, older, calmer, stronger. I thought about how strange life was, how one dinner could plant the seed of a dream, and another could show you how far you've grown from the soil that once buried your confidence. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my small home, rented, modest, but glowing with light. Inside, sketches lay scattered on my desk, samples pinned to the wall, fragments of the empire I was building one design at a time. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started sketching again. Because success, I'd learned, wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you were right to begin. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The sound of cutlery echoed across the long oak table, polished to perfection by my aunt, who loved everything that looked expensive. The irony still makes me smile. Back then, nothing about me looked expensive. I was 24, sitting between cousins with stable jobs and relatives with sensible opinions. My hair was tied back messily after another long shift at a small cafe, and I was running on 3 hours of sleep. "So, Isabella," my uncle began, setting his wine glass down with a deliberate pause, "you're still doing that, what do you call it? Decorating." "Interior design," I corrected softly, forcing a smile. He nodded with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Right. And how's that working out for you? Any millionaire clients yet?" Laughter followed, polite but sharp enough to slice through my confidence. I felt my mother's hand brush my arm under the table, her quiet way of telling me don't react. But something inside me shifted. "I'm actually planning to start my own studio," I said, trying to sound calm. "I've been saving, building a small portfolio, and I think—" The room fell silent for a beat. Then came the laughter again, louder this time. "You, a business?" my cousin Clara chuckled. "Issy, you can't even afford a car. Maybe start with a Pinterest board before a company, yeah." Someone else muttered, "She's young, let her dream," followed by another round of laughter that made it clear they didn't mean it. Every word stung, not because they doubted me, but because part of me doubted myself too. That night, I barely touched my food. The roasted chicken turned cold on my plate as I watched them, the people who'd known me since childhood, measure my worth by my income. When dessert came, I excused myself and stepped outside. The air was cold, and the city lights flickered in the distance like scattered promises. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, trying not to cry. Then I heard the door open behind me. It was my cousin Luke, the only one who hadn't laughed. "Hey," he said quietly, "don't let them get to you. They're just afraid of people who think differently." I nodded, forcing a smile, but his words only deepened the ache. Because I was afraid too, afraid that maybe they were right. But that fear became fuel. That night, when I got home, I opened my laptop, searched how to start an interior design business from nothing, and promised myself I would never let that dinner define me. The following months were brutal. I worked days at the cafe and nights freelancing online, designing logos, sketching room layouts, doing whatever paid. My friends went out, I stayed in. My phone buzzed with invitations I ignored. Every rejection email I got felt like another version of that laughter echoing in my head. But with every no, I improved. I watched free design webinars at 2 a.m., painted walls in client homes that barely paid, and documented everything. Every small job was a brick, every mistake a lesson. There were nights when exhaustion blurred my vision, when I'd stare at my reflection and wonder, what if they were right? But then I'd remember the smirk on Clara's face, that little twist of disbelief, and it would light a fire inside me again. One afternoon, about 8 months later, I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a post from a local influencer asking for help redesigning her apartment. Collaboration opportunity, it said. I hesitated, heart pounding. It wasn't paid, but it was a chance. I sent my pitch anyway. To my surprise, she replied within an hour. Loved your vibe, come by tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I planned, sketched, packed every tool I owned, and the next morning I walked into her apartment, palms sweating, heart racing. She greeted me warmly, showed me around, and said, I just want it to feel alive. For 3 days I worked nonstop. Painted, rearranged, added thrifted pieces, handmade touches, poured my soul into that space. When she saw the final result, her jaw dropped. It's perfect, she whispered. She posted a photo that same evening, tagged me. Within hours, my inbox flooded. Small projects, bigger ones, a cafe renovation, a local magazine feature. The laughter from that dinner began to fade into something else, background noise, behind the sound of my phone buzzing with new opportunities. By the end of that year, I registered my business, Hart Studio Interiors. My first official invoice was barely enough to cover rent, but it had my name printed at the top, and that felt like victory. I didn't tell my family, not yet. I wanted my work to speak before my words did. One night, months later, I got a text from my aunt, the same one who'd polished that oak table. Your cousin, getting married next month, family dinner tomorrow, come if you can. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart tightened, part dread, part defiance. I wasn't sure I was ready to face them again. But something inside whispered, you owe it to yourself to walk in proud. And so, I decided to go. It started with an email. A simple subject line. Interested in discussing a design project, urgent. At first, I thought it was spam. Most of those messages were, but something about the sender's name, Maya Klein, caught my attention. She was a well-known influencer, the kind with millions of followers and an image so polished it practically gleamed through the screen. She wanted her new apartment in Beverly Hills to feel like art. And she'd somehow found me. My hands trembled slightly as I read her message. She'd seen the post from the fashion studio project I just completed. Someone had tagged my work, and she'd fallen in love with the style. I remember whispering under my breath, is this really happening? The next afternoon, I drove to her apartment. My car, an old silver sedan with a flickering radio, looked painfully out of place in the glass-fronted parking lot full of luxury vehicles. But I didn't care. I was there to work, not to fit in. Maya greeted me at the door wearing oversized sunglasses and a smile that could sell anything. Isabella, finally, I've been dying to meet the genius behind those rooms. I smiled, slightly overwhelmed. I don't know about genius, but thank you. I'm really excited to get started. She led me through her penthouse, a space of high ceilings, marble floors, and windows that framed the city like art itself. But something about it felt empty. I want it to breathe, she said, to feel like home, not a showroom. Her words echoed something deep inside me, because that was my design philosophy, authenticity over perfection. Over the next few weeks, I poured myself into that project. We blended soft textures with sculptural pieces, creating a harmony of elegance and warmth. I hand-painted details, sourced local art, and spent hours adjusting lighting until it felt alive. And when it was done, Maya stood in the middle of the room, silent for a long moment. Then she turned to me, eyes bright. "You didn't just design my home," she said. "You told my story through walls." She posted a full video tour that night. By morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. "Who's the designer?" "Hart Studio Interiors is incredible. This woman's work feels like poetry." My Instagram exploded overnight. Thousands of new followers, dozens of DMs, journalists asking for interviews, and local brands wanting collaborations. For the first time, I wasn't chasing clients. They were chasing me. I sat at my tiny desk that morning, sunlight streaming through the curtains, staring at my inbox in disbelief. It was happening. The dream was finally taking shape. But success has a strange silence to it. Once the rush fades, you start hearing the echoes, old voices from your past. That evening, my phone buzzed again. A message from my mother. "Everyone's seen the video. Your aunt called. She says the whole family's proud." I laughed softly, not out of mockery, but disbelief. Proud. The same people who once called my dream foolish now called it inspiring. Part of me wanted to ignore the hypocrisy. Another part wanted to forgive. But mostly, I felt detached. Success doesn't always bring joy. Sometimes, it brings quiet confusion. A week later, Maya invited me to a rooftop event, a networking night for designers, artists, and creators. I almost said no. I'd never felt comfortable in big crowds of glossy, confident people. But she insisted. "You have to come, it's where your next chapter begins." And she was right. That night, the rooftop glowed with golden lights strung between palm trees. Music floated through the air, mingling with the laughter of people who looked like they belonged in magazines. I stood near the edge, holding a glass of sparkling water, taking it all in. That's when I heard a voice behind me. Isabella Hart, right? The designer from Maya's video. I turned to see a tall man with kind eyes and a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. "Yes," I said cautiously, "that's me." He extended his hand. "I'm Jonathan Reed. I manage a network of boutique hotels in California. We're expanding, and your design caught my eye." My breath caught. "You've seen my work." He smiled. "Everyone's seen your work this week, and I think you might be exactly what our next project needs." The following week, I walked into a boardroom overlooking the city, walls of glass, polished floors, and executives waiting to hear my ideas. It didn't feel real. Just months ago, I was painting walls for pocket change. Now, I was presenting design concepts for a hotel chain worth millions. When I finished my pitch, the room went silent for a moment. Then Jonathan nodded slowly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Hart." Those 3 words echoed in my mind the whole drive home. That night, I stood in my apartment, same old walls, same creaky floors, and stared at my reflection in the window. I thought of that family dinner again. The laughter, the dismissal, the quiet humiliation. And then I thought of now. The opportunities, the respect, the growing empire that had sprouted from the ashes of doubt. But beneath the triumph, something heavier stirred, a quiet question that refused to fade. Would I still recognize myself in the reflection of success? Because with every client, every deal, every headline, a part of me felt both stronger and further away from the girl who once stood outside in the cold, wiping tears after dinner. And deep down, I wondered, was this the dream I wanted, or the one I built just to prove them wrong? Fame doesn't arrive with a thunderclap. It seeps in quietly, like water through the cracks of your routine. At first, it was small things. A stranger recognizing me at a cafe, a journalist quoting my words in a magazine, a client saying, "You're the designer everyone's talking about." Every compliment felt surreal. Every new project a confirmation that I'd made it. But somewhere between the design boards and deadlines, I began losing something I couldn't name. It was past midnight one evening when I finally turned off my laptop. My apartment was dark except for the city glow seeping through the curtains. My phone buzzed, another notification. Tag, Hart Studio Interiors. Someone had just posted a picture of one of my projects with the caption, "Inspired by Isabella Hart's modern luxe aesthetic sparkles." I stared at the screen for a long time. That word, inspired, used to make my heart race. Now it only made me tired. Because behind every picture, there were endless nights of stress, overthinking, and exhaustion no one saw. Success had stopped feeling like freedom. It was starting to feel like performance. The next morning, I had a meeting at a boutique hotel, one of the biggest contracts of my career. My assistant, Erin, met me at the lobby. She was 22, bright-eyed, and always one step ahead. "You've got press after lunch," she said, scanning her tablet. "Then dinner with Jonathan about the new project." I nodded, barely listening. Did the shipment for the client house in Bel Air arrive? "Delayed," she said. "Customs." Of course it was. Everything lately was delayed, urgent, or crisis-level important. I rubbed my temples and forced a smile. "All right, let's make it work." After the meeting, as I was leaving the hotel, a voice called from behind me. "Isabella." I turned and froze. It was Clara, my cousin, the same cousin who'd once laughed at my dream across that oak table. But this time, she wasn't smirking. She looked different, softer, maybe even nervous. "Wow," she said, glancing around. "This place, it's incredible. I saw your name on the project list. I had to check if it was you." I smiled politely. "It's me." She hesitated before speaking again. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how we treated you that night. We were wrong." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and something inside me shifted. I'd imagined that apology for years, rehearsed my response, my perfect moment of poetic justice. But now that it was real, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. "I know," I said softly. "We were all different people back then." She nodded, looking down. "You've really done it, Isabella. Everyone in the family talks about you now." "Do they?" I asked gently. "Oh, yes, you're like the success story." She smiled, but there was something uneasy behind it. "But you never come around anymore." I met her eyes, maybe because I remember how it felt to be laughed at in that house. Her face fell. I deserved that. Silence stretched between us, heavy but honest. Before leaving, she said quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you." That night, I drove home in silence. Lowe's angels shimmered around me, lights, noise, movement, but inside I felt hollow. Her words kept echoing in my mind. "You never come around anymore." She was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd built walls higher than any mansion I could ever design. Not to keep people out, but to protect the fragile version of myself that had once been laughed at. When I reached home, I didn't turn the lights on. I just sat by the window, staring at the reflection of my face against the city skyline. I thought about the girl I used to be, messy hair, trembling voice, a dream too big for her reality. She would have been ecstatic to see all this. But I wondered if she'd recognize me now. Because success had changed me. It had sharpened my edges, quieted my laughter, and replaced my hunger with caution. I'd built an empire, but somewhere inside, the dreamer had gone silent. A week later, Jonathan invited me to a charity gala. "Great for exposure," he'd said. I agreed, though my heart wasn't in it. The ballroom was dazzling, chandeliers dripping gold light, people in tailored perfection, conversations about investments and art. When I stepped in, cameras flashed. "Isabella Hart," someone whispered. "She's here." It should have felt good. It didn't. I smiled, I nodded, I played the part, the composed, successful designer everyone admired. But behind every smile, I felt a strange loneliness bloom. I realized that success without peace is just noise dressed in glamour. Halfway through the night, I slipped outside to the terrace. The air was cool, the city stretched below, and for the first time in months I breathed, really breathed. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself, You made it, Isabella, but don't lose her, the girl who started it all. Because beneath the fame, I missed the simplicity, the passion born from rejection, the late nights designing for no one but myself, the dream that didn't care about applause. The next morning, I made a decision. I turned down 2 luxury projects that didn't align with my heart. Instead, I started sketching ideas for something different, something that mattered. A new studio line, Heart for Homes. Affordable design for ordinary families. Real homes, real stories. I didn't announce it, I just began. Because sometimes, the truest form of success is when the world claps for you. It's when your soul finally whispers, "You're home." The first year after quitting my job felt like walking barefoot across glass. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, my hands trembling slightly as I opened my old laptop. The light flickered like it, too, wasn't sure if it could handle another day of my dreams. I rented a tiny studio apartment downtown. The walls were thin, the floor creaked, and I could hear my neighbor arguing with her cat. But that room, it was my sanctuary. It was where Heart Interiors was born, though at that time it wasn't a brand. It was a girl with borrowed tools and stubborn hope. My bank account had fewer digits than my phone number. I remember sitting at my desk, sipping cheap coffee, staring at my business plan and whispering to myself. Just one client, Bella, just one. That one client came in the most unexpected way. A friend of a friend needed help decorating a small cafe before its opening. I didn't even have proper materials. I borrowed paintbrushes, cut costs wherever possible, and offered to do it at half the market rate. When I first stepped into that cafe, I saw more dust than design. The walls were faded, and the owner was nervous, a middle-aged woman named Clara. She said, "I can't afford fancy. I just want it to feel warm." I smiled. Warm is my favorite kind of fancy. For 2 weeks, I worked until midnight. I sanded walls with my own hands, moved furniture alone, and painted until my wrists ached. When I couldn't afford decor pieces, I built them out of scrap wood. Every inch of that cafe had a piece of me in it, the same way my dream did. On opening day, Clara hugged me with tears in her eyes. She said, "You made it feel like home." Those 5 words meant more than a paycheck. That cafe became a small local hit. People came not only for the coffee, but to take pictures in front of the wall I hand-painted. Soon, someone asked Clara, "Who designed this?" And that's how I got my second client. Then my third. Then an influencer walked into one of my projects, took a photo, and tagged me on Instagram. Within months, messages started to fill my inbox. Not thousands, not yet, but enough to keep me up late, smiling in disbelief. Still, success came with a price. My days were long, my nights longer. I skipped birthdays, weddings, and every family gathering. I remember once my mum called, her voice soft and hesitant. "Sweetheart, everyone asking about you. Why don't you come for dinner?" I stared at the half-finished sketches on my desk. "Mum, I can't. I'm working on a client presentation." She sighed. "You've been working for months, darling. Don't forget to live a little." But what she didn't understand was, this was my life. Every brushstroke, every sleepless night, every tear of exhaustion. It was all part of the story I was writing, one design at a time. Sometimes, though, the silence got heavy. There were nights I'd look at my reflection in the studio window and whisper, "Is it worth it?" Because while my business grew, my circle shrank. The same people who once mocked me had gone quiet, but none of them had reached out. Not to ask how I was doing, not to say congratulations, not even to check if I was okay. It's strange, isn't it? How the laughter of others echoes louder in your memory than their silence ever could. One evening, around midnight, I received a message that stopped me cold. It was from my cousin, Olivia, the same one who, years ago, had laughed the loudest at that dinner table. "Hey Bella, saw your cafe project on Instagram. Looks nice. Could you help me redesign my living room?" For a long moment, I just stared at the message. My hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part wanted to say yes, not for her, but for the satisfaction of knowing I'd become the person she once said I couldn't be. Finally, I replied, "Of course, Liv, let's talk details." When I walked into her house a week later, she looked surprised. "Wow," she said, almost whispering. "You look different." I smiled faintly. So does life sometimes. Her husband shook my hand awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. The same man who once joked about my Pinterest fantasies now stood in front of me, trying to sound professional. We discussed colors, furniture, and layout, but beneath every polite sentence was an unspoken truth. She had laughed at me, and now she needed me. Driving home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how quietly tables turn. Not with noise or drama, but with time and grace. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate either. I just sat by my window, sipping tea, watching the city lights blink like silent applause. I realized something powerful that night: success doesn't need to shout. Sometimes, it only needs to exist. But as my projects grew bigger and my reputation stronger, something inside me began to shift. Was I still chasing passion or proving a point? That quiet question lingered in my mind like a ghost, following me through every project, every deal, every smiling client. Because while the world was finally applauding, I was starting to forget what I was truly clapping for. The days blurred together. Meetings bled into photo shoots bled into client calls, and client calls bled into endless revisions. I began to notice the subtle changes, the aching in my shoulders that never went away, the bags under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, the way I craved silence yet rarely found it. I was finally successful, yet I felt exhausted. One evening, after leaving a gala, I returned to my apartment and sank onto my sofa. My phone buzzed endlessly: notifications, client requests, urgent emails. I scrolled mechanically, hardly seeing the names. Then I paused. A DM from Olivia appeared. "Can you do my office next week? Need it ready for meetings." I sighed. A small voice inside me whispered, "You've earned this, Isabella. You've worked too hard to stop now." But another voice, quieter, more insistent, asked, "Why does it feel like work and not joy anymore?" I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, letting the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about my studio's first project, the cafe, the apartment, the fashion studio, and the fire that once consumed me. I realized something terrifying. The fire was dimming. I had achieved recognition, clients, even money beyond my early imagination. But in the quiet moments, the ones without praise or applause, I felt hollow. A knock at the door startled me. It was Erin, my assistant, clutching a notebook filled with sketches. "You've got to see this," she said, eyes bright. "Jonathan called. He wants to expand your studio internationally. London, Paris, he's offering a partnership." I forced a smile, nodding. "That's great." But my chest tightened. The weight of expectation pressed down. Every project, every client, every decision now carried a magnitude I wasn't sure I could carry alone. "Bella, are you okay?" Erin asked gently, noticing my hesitation. I shook my head slightly. I just need a moment." She nodded and left, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the city and the weight of my ambition. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Flights, client meetings, negotiations. My calendar was a mosaic of deadlines. I began skipping meals, drinking too much coffee, and sleeping in short bursts on the studio couch. My friends called, but I ignored them. My mother called, but I avoided her. Success was exhilarating and isolating. One night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by sketches, mood boards, and half-finished concepts. My phone lit up with a picture of my cousin Olivia's redesigned living room, perfect, staged, Instagram-ready. I stared at it, feeling a strange mix of pride and emptiness. I had delivered excellence, but for whom? Was I building a life I loved, or one everyone else admired? It was during that same night that I made a decision. I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and left the apartment. I drove without destination, letting the neon glow of the city guide me. After a while, I found myself at the same park where, years ago, I had sat with sketchbooks under a street lamp, dreaming of starting Hart studio interiors. I sat on the cold bench and let the wind sweep over me. The memories came rushing back. The laughter at the family dinner, the fear, the uncertainty, and the nights I spent building something out of nothing. Tears ran down my cheeks, not because I had failed, I hadn't, but because I realized that in chasing recognition, I had almost lost the joy that made me start. The following morning, I returned to the studio with clarity. I called Aaron into my office. "We're making a change," I said. "We'll still take high-profile projects, but we're going back to doing work that matters to people's lives. Homes, families, spaces that tell stories, not just sell aesthetics." Erin smiled, relief washing over her face. "I thought you might say that. I've seen you working late nights, and I think this is what you need." It was more than a business decision. It was a decision for my soul. That week, I started small. We designed a bedroom for a single mother and her children, a cozy living room for a family who had just moved into a new home, a study for an elderly couple who wanted comfort above style. And with each project, the fire returned. The quiet satisfaction that had first sparked my dream reignited. I realized then that success wasn't about the applause. It was about passion. It was about creating something meaningful, something alive, something that made people feel at home, and in doing so, finding my own home within myself. That night, as I closed the studio, I looked out at the city skyline. I thought about my family dinner, the laughter, and the years of hard work that had brought me here. I smiled softly. I had turned humiliation into fuel. I had turned silence into an empire. And now I understood something deeply important. Real success is quiet. It doesn't boast. It doesn't seek revenge. It simply exists, and in existing, it transforms everything it touches. Success is a strange companion. It whispers promises, flashes glamour, and invites the world to admire you. But it also asks for sacrifices, quiet, invisible, relentless. That morning, I walked into Hart Studio Interiors, the sunlight cutting across the polished floors, illuminating sketches pinned to the walls. Each project felt alive, yet I felt stretched. The international expansion Jonathan proposed was looming over me like a shadow. London, Paris, Milan, opportunities most designers only dream of. And yet, excitement felt hollow. Aaron noticed before I even said a word. "Bella, you look tired. Are you okay?" I paused, staring at the layout for a client's living room. "I'm fine, just thinking." She frowned, thinking about the expansion. I nodded slowly. "It's big, too big maybe, but it's what I worked for." Her voice softened. "But have you worked for it or against yourself? Sometimes we chase more because we're proving something, not because we want it." Her words struck a chord. I had been running so fast, reaching for every opportunity, I hadn't stopped to ask myself why. That afternoon, I met with Jonathan for a briefing about the European launch. His office, perched high above downtown, overlooked the city, a view that should have inspired me. Instead, I felt the weight of every expectation pressing down. "Isabella, the European launch could redefine your brand," Jonathan said, enthusiastic as always. "We'll handle the logistics, you just need to approve the designs." I smiled politely, but inside I was trembling. "And the creative control?" I asked. "Yours, you'll have full control. Trust me, this is your moment." But even as he spoke, I questioned it. Was it my moment, or someone else's vision of what my moment should be? That evening, I returned to my apartment and sank into my favorite chair by the window. Lowe's angels stretched below me, city lights blinking like distant stars. I thought of my early days, the rented studio, the cafe project, the long nights with nothing but a sketchbook and hope. Back then, ambition had been pure. It had been about creation, passion, and the thrill of building something from nothing. Now, ambition felt heavier, almost foreign. I decided to take a walk. The streets were quiet. A soft breeze rustled through palm trees. I passed small cafes, late-night diners, and corner shops, places where dreams were born quietly, far from spotlight and applause. It hit me. I had spent so long building a life that looked successful, I almost forgot what it felt like to live it. Days passed, and I found myself at crossroads I hadn't anticipated. Do I take the European expansion and cement my empire? Or do I slow down, focus on meaningful projects, and recapture the joy that had first driven me? Both paths carried risk, both carried reward. One evening, Clara, my cousin, called unexpectedly. "I wanted to invite you for dinner," she said softly. "No family drama, just us." Her voice surprised me, a small flicker of warmth. I hesitated. Could I step back into the family circle without carrying the old resentment? Could I let the past rest quietly while I navigated my future? "I'll come," I said finally. That dinner was different from the last. No laughter mocking dreams. No hushed jokes behind hands. Just quiet conversation, soft smiles, and the faint scent of rosemary in the kitchen. We spoke about small things, life, work, mutual friends, and somewhere between pasta and tea, I realized that ambition wasn't only about success. It was also about balance. It was about learning when to push forward and when to pause. That night, walking home under the city lights, I felt a strange lightness. The crossroads were still ahead. European expansion beckoned with glittering promise. But I finally understood that my choice wasn't only about business or recognition. It was about the life I wanted to live, the legacy I wanted to leave, and the woman I wanted to become. Success without joy is hollow, I thought. And now, more than ever, I was determined not to let ambition steal the very thing that had brought me here, my love for creation, my quiet strength, and my sense of self. European expansion sat on my desk like a gleaming invitation, glossy presentations, glowing emails from Jonathan, maps of cities I had only dreamed of visiting. I traced my finger along London, Paris, Milan. The idea of my designs shaping spaces across continents thrilled me, but a heaviness settled in my chest. I realized that ambition had a double edge. It could lift you higher than you imagined, or cut you down if you lost yourself along the way. I spent the night thinking. I thought about my early projects, the cafe with chipped walls, the single mother's bedroom, the elderly couple's study. Those projects had something the European launch didn't, meaning. They weren't about recognition. They weren't about headlines or followers. They were about hearts, lives, and stories. I remembered the fire in my chest back then, raw, unpolished, unstoppable. And I realized I hadn't felt that fire for weeks. Morning came, soft and golden. I poured tea and sat by the window, drafting the email I knew I had to send. "Jonathan, thank you for this incredible opportunity. After careful thought, I've decided not to take the European expansion. My focus will remain on projects that allow me to connect with people's lives and create spaces that tell their stories." I hesitated before hitting send. Would he understand? Would he be disappointed? Then I thought of the countless nights I'd worked, not for recognition, not for applause, but for the joy of creating something meaningful. I hit send. Hours later, I received his reply. "I respect your decision, Isabella. Not everyone has the courage to follow their own path. I admire you for it. Hart Studio Interiors is yours and will support you in any way you choose to grow." I exhaled deeply, a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt freedom, not just success, but clarity. That evening, I drove to a family dinner, the first one I'd attended in years. The house smelled of roasted vegetables and cinnamon. My relatives glanced at me nervously, whispers floating through the air. I smiled warmly, letting the tension dissolve. No reminders of the past, no prideful boasting, just presence. They noticed the change, the quiet strength, the calm confidence, and for the first time I understood something profound. Success isn't about proving anyone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. During dinner, my cousin Olivia leaned closer. I always thought you were dreaming too big, but now I see. You were dreaming the right way. I reached out and held her hand gently. We all have dreams, live, some take longer to grow. What matters is nurturing them, not letting anyone else's laughter drown them out. Her eyes glistened. I'm proud of you, Bella, truly proud. I smiled quietly, feeling a warmth that no social media post or headline could ever replicate. After dinner, I stepped outside into the crisp night air. The city lights of Los Angeles sprawled beneath me, glittering like a million possibilities. I thought about my journey, the doubts, the laughter, the nights of tears and long hours. Every moment, every choice had led me here. And I realized the most important lesson of all. Success is not measured by wealth, fame, or the envy of others. It is measured by courage, by passion, by the grace to remain true to yourself, even when the world expects otherwise. That night, I returned home and sat by the pool, the reflection of stars dancing on the water's surface. I had built an empire, yes, but more importantly, I had built myself, a woman who could dream freely, create boldly, and live with integrity. The past was quiet now. The laughter of my relatives had faded into memory, replaced by something stronger: respect, understanding, and the gentle satisfaction of a life well chosen. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself, I am Isabella Hart. I dreamed when they laughed, worked when they doubted, and now I live on my own terms. The first time I realized my work had begun to influence people was subtle. I was sipping coffee in the studio, flipping through sketches for a new family home, when Erin rushed in, eyes wide. Bella, you need to see this. She handed me her phone. On the screen, a young couple had posted pictures of their new living room, decorated entirely in the style I'd created for them. But it wasn't just about aesthetics, the post read. We never believed we could have a home that felt like us. Thank you, Isabella Hart, for showing us it's possible. I stared at the words, my hand trembling slightly. For years, I had chased recognition from strangers, from clients, from magazines and social media. But this was different. This was intimate, real. Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't wealth, fame, or luxury that mattered most. It was knowing that something I created could touch lives, change how people felt in their own homes, their own worlds. That week, invitations started pouring in, not from celebrities or influencers, but from ordinary families, community spaces, and small businesses. A community center wanted me to redesign a children's reading room. A local shelter requested my help, making their living spaces brighter and warmer. Even a small cafe in South LA reached out to give their staff a better, more welcoming break room. Each project carried a story, a person, a hope, and with each one, I felt a pulse of purpose stronger than any headline or recognition. One afternoon, I visited the children's reading room. The walls were pale and uninviting. The shelves were sagging under the weight of old books. The room smelled faintly of damp paper and paint. I knelt down and drew a small sketch of what it could be: walls painted in gentle tones, corners with cushions, low shelves at the children's eye level, and soft lighting that made reading feel like a magical adventure. Can we really do this? The director asked, her voice hesitant but hopeful. I smiled. We can, and it will be perfect for them. Over the next few days, I poured myself into the project, guiding volunteers, sourcing affordable materials, and hand-painting details. It was exhausting, and yet, unlike before, exhaustion didn't feel heavy. It felt meaningful. When the room was finished, the children arrived. Their eyes widened. One little girl ran to a corner filled with colorful cushions and hugged a plush bear. A boy flipped through a book, eyes wide with wonder. I watched them, heart swelling, and in that moment I understood the real power of influence. It wasn't about the glossy pictures or social media likes. It was about creating spaces that made people feel safe, happy, and inspired. Spaces that allowed others to dream. That evening, I drove home slowly, the city lights reflecting off the windshield. I thought of my family dinner years ago, the mocking laughter, the disbelief in their eyes, the doubts whispered over the table. And I realized that true influence doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from proving yourself right, from staying true to your vision, your heart, and your passion. I had built a brand, but more importantly, I had built trust, connection, inspiration. The ripple of influence reached even my family. Olivia called that night. "Bella, I saw the reading room pictures online. It's beautiful. They're lucky to have you." I smiled softly. "Thanks, Liv. It's more than me, it's the team, the families, and everyone who believed it could happen." Her voice was quiet, sincere. "You've grown into someone I admire, truly." I felt a warmth in my chest. Not pride, not revenge, just a gentle, deep satisfaction. But as the projects multiplied, I faced a subtle tension. The world wanted my influence, headlines, social media, public appearances, but I feared the cost. Could I keep touching lives while staying true to the quiet passion that had started it all? Or would I lose myself in the noise of expectation? It was a question I didn't have an answer for yet. Late that night, I stood by the pool of my new home, a modest mansion, yes, but one I earned on my terms. The water reflected the stars above, and for a moment, everything felt calm. I whispered into the cool night air. Influence isn't fame. Influence isn't applause. It's the moments that matter, the lives touched, the hearts inspired, and that is what I'll never lose. I leaned back, letting the night wrap around me. The journey wasn't over. The empire was growing, yes, but more importantly, so was I. Because the ripple of influence doesn't end with success. It begins with intention, and I intended to create, inspire, and lead with heart. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing relentlessly. Messages, notifications, emails, some from clients, some from strangers praising my work, some from media outlets requesting interviews. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The recognition I had once craved now pressed down on me like a weight I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. The ripple of influence had grown, yes, but with it came a subtle, unsettling question. Am I still creating for myself or for the world's applause? I decided to take a walk. The city was quiet in the early hours, Lowe's angels humming softly beneath the sunrise. I passed the corner where I had once sold sketches to local cafes, the small coffee shop where a stranger had once tagged me online, and the park bench where I had stared at the stars, dreaming of this exact life. Everything had changed, yet the memory of those moments reminded me of the fire I had carried, the raw passion that had driven me to stay up all night designing, learning, and building. At the studio, Aaron looked concerned. "Bella, you've got meetings lined up for the week, and Jonathan wants updates on expansion possibilities." I nodded, but my mind wandered. "Aaron, do we sometimes create for ourselves or just for the recognition?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe both, but I think the trick is to never let recognition dictate your choices. That's why you've stayed different. That's why your designs touch lives." Her words hit me like a gentle wave. Later that afternoon, I visited one of my favorite projects, a family who had just moved into a modest home, redesigned entirely by my team. The mother hugged me tightly. "You don't know how much this means to us. My children finally have a space where they feel safe, loved, and inspired." I smiled, heart swelling. Recognition, I realized, didn't have to be public. Some of the most profound acknowledgement came quietly, in moments like this. By evening, I returned to my mansion. The pool reflected the fatting sun, and I walked along the edge, deep in thought. I thought of my family dinner years ago, their laughter, the disbelief in their eyes. I had wanted then, more than anything, to prove myself, and I had. But proving myself had always been secondary. What truly mattered now was remaining true to myself, even when the world watched, praised, or judged. That night, my cousins came by unexpectedly. Olivia and Clara, the very ones who had once dismissed my dreams, arrived with nervous smiles. They looked around my home, eyes wide. The mansion, the pool, the subtle elegance of every room, yes, it was success by any measure. But I didn't boast. I didn't need to. Instead, I shared stories, the small victories, the families whose lives had changed, the little projects that had made my heart leap. They listened, really listened. Olivia finally said, softly, "Bella, we underestimated you. We didn't see your vision, your dedication, the courage it took. We were sorry for laughing." I smiled, feeling a quiet strength bloom inside me. "Thank you. That means more than you know. But more than apologies, I hope this inspires you to chase your own dreams, even if others laugh." There was a pause. Then Clara added, "We see it now. The fire you had, it's real and it's extraordinary." And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years. A sense of balance between recognition and reflection, pride and humility, ambition and authenticity. That night, I sat alone by the pool again. I realized that recognition, influence, and admiration were all fleeting, but self-respect, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of meaningful creation, those were lasting. I whispered to myself, "I have learned, I have grown, I have inspired, and I will continue on my terms with heart, with passion, with grace." Because true success, I understood, is not measured by applause or envy. It's measured by the courage to follow your dream, the integrity to remain true to yourself, and the quiet joy of knowing you've made a difference in the lives of others. The morning sunlight streamed through the grand windows of my mansion, illuminating every corner of the home I had built with patience, grit, and unwavering determination. I walked through the rooms slowly, touching the edges of handcrafted furniture, inhaling the scent of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, and pausing at each wall adorned with sketches and photos from projects that had touched countless lives. It struck me, this wasn't just a house. It was a testament to every choice, every sleepless night, every ounce of courage I had mustered when the world laughed. I remembered that family dinner vividly. The laughter, the mocking tones, the disbelief in their eyes when I spoke of my dream to start my own interior design brand. And now, years later, those same faces were coming through my door, stepping into the spaces I had created, walking through the halls I had designed with purpose. It was surreal. My cousins, once dismissive and skeptical, looked around in awe. Olivia whispered, "Bella, it's more than we ever imagined." I smiled softly. It's not about imagining, it's about believing and acting on that belief, no matter what anyone says. Clara nodded, tears glistening. "We see now, not just the success, but the journey, the heart behind it." And for a moment, the years of tension, doubt, and humiliation melted into something far more powerful, quiet understanding. Later, I walked them through the studio, showing them photos and stories of families whose homes had been transformed, children who now had safe, creative spaces, and businesses that had been revitalized with care and attention. They listened intently, genuinely interested, not for show, not for social media posts, but with real appreciation. I realized then that my empire, my influence, wasn't measured by opulence or recognition, but by lives touched, hearts moved, and dreams ignited in others. That evening, the family gathered by the pool. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. I poured drinks, and we talked about old memories, childhood dreams, and lessons learned. No judgment, no mockery, just connection. I looked at my relatives and felt a quiet grace settle within me. I had won, not through pride or revenge, but through perseverance, authenticity, and heart. I had transformed humiliation into fuel, doubt into action, and silence into legacy. Later that night, I stood alone by the pool, the stars reflected perfectly in the still water. I thought about the journey, the early days in my cramped studio, the first cafe project, the small victories, the failures, the moments of doubt, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing dreams come alive. I whispered to myself, I dreamed when they laughed, I worked when they doubted, and now I live fully, authentically, and gracefully. This is my story, my success, my life. The city lights shimmered in the distance, but they no longer defined me. I had defined myself. And in that quiet reflection, I knew the journey was complete. Not because the world acknowledged it, but because I had stayed true, created with heart, and found peace within. The mansion was quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. I wandered through the rooms, pausing to touch a corner I had designed for a young family, a shelf where a child had left a tiny drawing, a study where an elderly couple had found comfort in every detail. These were more than spaces. They were stories, moments, and lives intertwined with my own. And in them, I saw the legacy of my dream. I thought of that night years ago, the family dinner where my ideas were ridiculed, my ambitions dismissed as fantasies. I remembered the sting of laughter, the subtle scoffs, the doubts whispered across the table. And now, the very same relatives walked through my doors, their eyes wide with genuine admiration, their voices filled with respect, not judgment. I didn't need to say a word. The work spoke for itself. The dream had spoken for itself. Later, I sat with my team, reflecting on the journey. Every project matters, I said quietly. Not because it's profitable or glamorous, but because it changes someone's life. That is the real measure of success. Aaron smiled. And you've inspired all of us to keep dreaming, Isabella, to create with heart. I nodded, heart swelling. It wasn't just my dream anymore. It was our dream, a ripple spreading far beyond the walls of my mansion or studio. That evening, I received a message from a young designer I had mentored years ago. I watched your journey, Isabella. You showed me that dreams are worth fighting for, even when the world laughs. Thank you for being an example. I read the words slowly, letting them sink in. That's when I realized something profound. The laughter that once stung had become fuel. The doubts had sharpened my resolve. The silence had honed my focus. And now, my story, the story I had lived, struggled, and triumphed through, could inspire someone else to chase their own dream. I stepped onto the balcony, the Los Angeles skyline glittering like a sea of stars beneath me. I thought about ambition, recognition, humility, and influence, and I understood the truth I had come to live. Success is not about proving others wrong. It is about proving yourself right. It is about staying true, creating with heart, and inspiring others along the way. The cool night air wrapped around me as I whispered into the darkness. I dreamed when they laughed. I worked when they doubted. I lived when I could have faltered. And now, I leave a legacy that speaks louder than any mockery ever could. The journey was complete, not with applause, not with envy, not with the validation of others, but with quiet, unshakable fulfillment. I had turned humiliation into fuel, doubt into action, and a simple dream into a lasting legacy.